Presidential elections in Algeria are coming. The longevity of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika and the economic situation caused new demonstrations 1.5 weeks ago approximately in the main cities of this country, so they say. It calls our attention that the youth are protagonists. The main tool are the networks, and people are adding to these demonstrations, and this country, socialist country of the Mediterranean Maghreb, has many oil, gas resources. Rumors are abundant at this time. The media, official media, impose an image that Algeria is on fire, and show that the government appeased the country. If we look exhaustively for current data that allow to question the hegemonic speech that is being imposed and find certain clarity, we wonder, and will analyze in the light of the events we will describe. The next Algeria is the next war laboratory. This is our critical move today. We will look at last facts and actors involved. Uncertainty opened after the signature of the call for elections in mid-January is clarified. President of Algeria is 81 years old and will participate next elections on April 18. His candidacy for a fifth term has been registered on the expiration term by his recently appointed chief of campaign. The Constitution does not impose the presence of the candidate in person to register the candidacy, and can be represented by anybody. After delivering the required documentation, the representative read a letter that saying several commitments. If God allows, and if the Algerian people votes for me again, I will promise to change the system. I promise to carry out advanced elections. I promise not to be a candidate in that election. We go to some digital web pages. Let's go to Al Mayadeen, that on Saturday, March 2, published Algeria, Bouteflika under regular medical tests and will be back to the country as soon as possible. Colonel Abdelaziz Sharif confirmed in an interview that the president was under routine medical tests in Switzerland and will be back home soon. He warned, there are many hands working in secret to promote fake news. France entered the Algerian presidential elections to implement its agenda and revenge. Protests have taken place in many sites as Alger, Berhalia, the north, and the protagonic role is in the hands of university students. The information agency talked about wounded youngsters in the capital on Friday. The security bodies have had to respond to criminal acts against public property. This is Al Mayadeen. I will now go to Prensa Latina under the title, Another Opposition Party Withdraws His Candidate in the Elections in Algeria. Opponent Consultative Council Movement for Peace withdrew its candidate, and it's the second movement. The first was the Workers' Party, and they did it justifying by saying that they will support the protests against Bouteflika that started last 22 in Algeria. Government Alliance composed by the National Liberation Front, the National Group for Democracy, and Popular Algerian Movement, has said that elections is the only way to take power. This is what they tell the people who want to get there. They called a civilized campaign and follow all the rules. Information, important data from Andalusia. Our correspondent Sergio Rodrigo will add some details to this election that will take place in Algeria. Greetings, Telesur. Current president of Algeria, Bouteflika, yesterday confirmed that he will run for president again next April. Through his campaign representative, he will be running for a fifth term, even if in the last weeks many protests had taken place, especially in the students' movement, according to the state television news that reported that President Bouteflika said that he is re-elected president of Algeria. He will carry out the reform of the constitution for the new Algerian Republic and promised changing the constitution to end to a constitutional referendum and advance presidential elections within the terms in Algerian law. It doesn't talk about dates, but he insists that this electoral advance of presidential elections will not include Bouteflika, that did participate this time, as confirmed by state public agency. We must remember that Algeria is the largest country in the North Africa and also partner in oil exporter parties, a member of OPEC, and since 1982, independent from France, that has led a social political project that for many years has been practically threatened by the interference of corporations and countries. We must remember that for tenths of years it was colonized by France. Thank you, Sergio, for those updated data. The strategic location of Algeria in the north of Africa is a good, significant aspect. Can these last protests be the opportunity for foreign actors like France and the United States interfere and turn Algeria into the next war laboratory or the African Syria? We wonder also how interesting is an Algerian crisis for Europe that would result in more migrations. We will answer this after this pause. We are back to develop our critical move today. Algeria, the next war laboratory? Let's look at some aspects of internal politics that allow us to understand the framework of the current situation. Abdelaziz Bouteflika, born in Oujda, 5 kilometers away with the border of the Algeria, 19 years old, crossed the border to unite the National Liberation Front. He is a key actor in the struggle of independence against France that took place in 1962. At 25, he was appointed Minister of Sports, Youth and Tourism, and later Foreign Affairs Minister. This made him the ruler of Algerian plan at the time. Besides the support of the military, the armed forces chose Bouteflika because he was the best candidate. In 1969, he reached power with a program of national conciliation in the midst of a civil war that lasted all decade. He obtained 75.9% of votes in a day where there was official participation of 62.27%. Later, with 85% of votes in 2004, he was elected for a second term. In 2009, the third one with 90.24%. And in 2014, he won with 83.83% of votes. In all cases, he has always had high popular support. The opposition have always talked about electoral fraud unsuccessfully. Today, he has a political economic coalition, the National Liberation Front and the National Democratic Group. He has achievement as the end of the 90s war, peace, modernization, construction of infrastructure, housing and university, economic recovery, and democratization in gas and electricity, a country marked by independence war and civil war later. In 2005, he underwent surgery, and this is used conveniently to talk about his political future, and also in the demonstrations they say are spontaneous. Several kilometers on the border are penetrated by terrorism, a phenomenon of several countries of Africa and Middle East. It threatens peace with a possible foreign interference. We will now review another web page. In this case, we have Sputnik under the title, An Old Friend of the Cold War, one of the main allies of Russia in Africa. Interviewed by this media, the Russian ambassador in Algeria said Russia and Algeria have similar economies from the point of view of its structure. This is why both countries have a long history to develop cooperation in the economic arena. According to some estimates, Algeria is able to become the third country of the world with the largest gas and schist reserves. This is why Russian corporations, together with the foreign competitors, can participate in the exploration of the reserves. This was declared by Russian ambassador in Algeria. Well, as I said, borders are important. We can come here to our table. I ask production and direction to show the world map before we go to the corresponding analysis. Officially, Democratic and Popular Republic of Algeria is one of the 54 countries of Africa north of the continent, next to Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, Libya. It is part of the strategic Maghreb. To the north, it has the Mediterranean Sea, to the east, Tunisia and Libya, to the south, Niger and Mali, and to the west, Morocco and the occupied Western Sahara. Morocco is closed since 1990, with 2 million, almost 3 million square kilometers, which is the largest of the continent and the most populated, with around 41 million inhabitants, according to the last 2017 census. I was also telling you about its strategic importance related with resources on the ground, one of the African countries that is most modern and developed. But there is something, which is the huge oil and gas reserves it has. It also has gas, iron, zinc, phosphates, silver, and copper. And the main income of the state, more than 60%, is the sale of fossil fuels. We will now add analysis together with our guests. The connection at this time can only be made through telephone. He is specialized in Africa and Asia. It is a pleasure to have you here. Your vision of what is happening at this time in Algeria to start, please. Thank you for your invitation. It's an honor for me. The situation in Algeria, as you well presented it, at this time is critical. President Bouteflika is running for another term that for elections that will take place next April. This has caused protests at all levels because this fifth mandate of a president then in 2013 underwent surgery and practically had no activity. At this time he is at a hospital in Geneva. As you well explained, this country has significant oil and gas resources, but is undergoing severe economic crisis, unemployment. The people is very unhappy with the president's activity, even though it is suspected that some relative, his brother, for example, is the one who governs actually. Is it crazy to think that there could be other reasons that are supporting these protests based on experiences that are still too recent, like Libya in Maghreb or Syria in the Middle East? What do you think of this? Let's say that the Arab Spring that overthrew most governments in the north of Africa, Libya, Egypt, Tunisia, could explain that even if they have multiple lines of credit that were never returned to the population, and unfortunately not to the young people, but this is an alternative. There's the possibility of an attempted coup, the establishment of a more fundamentalist government. Let's remember that almost all the last decade in the 20th century, Algeria was involved in a war between Islamists and military, a war that caused 200,000 deaths. And Algeria especially is surrounded by a series of countries, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and Libya, where Islamic terrorism is very strong and constant. We are receiving news of attacks, assaults, death. These are very permeable borders and easy to cross. It wouldn't be strange that Algeria would have some kind of movement like this. From the Western point of view, Algeria does not commit essentially U.S. and European interests. So from there, I don't think it could be subject of some interest in defeating the current president. While the opponent parties have stepped back in all fronts, and the immediate political Algerian panorama makes impossible the participation of political movements to change. At this time, there are not enough powerful candidates or credible candidates that challenge Bouteflika. Nevertheless, the current protests could change that reality and change the status quo. This is a paragraph I wanted to quote. I would also like to ask you about the situation of the opposition in the country, the political parties, but also why several of the political opponents are withdrawing their candidacies. Well, the main of them was Ali Benassi, that withdrew his candidacy, and he was the great opponent of current President Bouteflika. We must see who capitalizes these protests and this semi-anarchical state that has been created in the last hours in Algeria. It is still too early to know who can benefit from this situation. We are very close to elections, a little less or a little more than a month for a front to be composed, and besides, bureaucratically, yesterday, the possibility of registering candidacies closed. The president also announced that if he were re-elected for the fifth time, he would call general elections once again to elect his successor. What could happen? It's very soon to analyze and find the correct conclusions. He has also said that there would be a constituent process in the country. Talking about the opposition, Guadi, Spain describes one of the main representatives, Rachid Nekaz, as the French-Algerian millionaire that seduces youth who have an important role in the last protests. And in Algeria and other cities of the country. El País in Spain says that Algeria, with 45% youngsters below 25 years old, this candidate was born outside Paris. He is the son of illiterate Algerian migrants, and he founded a small internet corporation, but he says that social networks is his main tool, according to what we read in that local media. Could you tell us something about this person? Actually, I can't. This character is quite dark. More coming from France, that we know Paris is permanently operating against its colonies. We see it throughout Africa. Its former colonies are being addressed by French interests, and perhaps this character is the great candidate of France to conduct this political moment in Algeria. But I repeat, I think everything is too recent to know what effect this could have. Wadi, so you deny our hypothesis that these last protests can be an opportunity of foreign actors like France and the United States as to set two examples of penetrating Algeria and doing what they did in other countries of the region? No, I couldn't deny that possibility in any way whatsoever. We know very well how the United States and France and UK operate, particularly in countries like Algeria. Or others in similar circumstances. But I think that the reality is that Bouteflika has complied in full with Western interests. This is why it will call my attention if they were interested in defeating them. I understand your position, Wadi. A specific point in Maghreb, which is the dispute between Morocco and Algeria for the Western Sahara. We just had a program about it. Understanding that Algeria supports the self-determination sovereign cause of the Sahrawi people, and Morocco occupies the richest part of this area. Is this so? It is. The Sahrawi people, since 1975, is waiting for what Franco had promised them, because at the time all Western Africa was a Spanish colony, and Franco had promised its independence, something that King Juan Carlos did not comply because of the mineral wealth Western Africa has, and the huge fishing banks they have along their coasts. Morocco and Spain have historically intervened for the Sahrawi people to find its independence. Algeria has collaborated, but in these last years, the great support to the Sahrawi people, which has been Colonel Gaddafi, and we all know how all this ended. I don't believe the Sahrawi people will find solutions in these circumstances that the north of Africa is living. Thank you very much, Wadi, for your considerations. This was Wadi Calvo from Argentina, international analyst specialized in Middle East, Africa, and Asia. It's important now to go back to one of the premises we were developing. Algeria is a country with important hydrocarbon reserves, an important member of OPEC, supplier of hydrocarbons to the European Union, several of its countries, and geographically, it's an important pass of gas ducts that Nigeria wants to build. What does this determine? This also gives us golden data. We will now go to a pause and contact our next guest and be back with our critical move today. Algeria, the next laboratory of war. This is the title of a critical move today. The European Union in 2014 had an energy security strategy that wants to reduce the dependence on Russian Federation and diversify routes and suppliers. Nigeria is the best position in Africa, but strengthening that position would come from a construction of two gas ducts that would connect its gas with the European Union through Algeria and Morocco, a neighbor. In the European search for partners who satisfy its energy needs, Algeria depends on the demand of the neighbors and came out as a priority partner. In 2016, recorded 15% of the natural gas of the European Union, almost 4% more than 2015, and this makes it the third main supplier of the European Union. Spain is the main partner, receives 4% of Algerian exports. Italy, Portugal, and France also receive an important quota, 16%, 15%, and 9.4% respectively. Another determining factor is that Algeria accepts Sahrawi exiles. It has relations with Mali, Libya, China, Russia in the same line of having friends. Morocco has an invariable position about the Sahrawi. It continues diversifying relations, especially with the Gulf monarchies. But the juncture seems favorably because nobody talks about the occupation in Sahara. The closing of the international border shared between Algeria and Morocco makes Maghreb the less integrated commercial region of the world. Barely 8.4% has this trade. To continue analyzing, we have Batir Afneta Omar, Sahrawi journalist. Hello, Batir. We have telephone communication with you again. I want to ask as a first thing what is happening at this time in Algeria. Greetings to you. I would first like to thank you for your invitation to participate in your program. What is happening in Algeria, from what I've been listening, energy has much to do. What we see above all is that Abdelaziz Bouteflika is running for his 5th term. This is the excuse why demonstrations are taking place. It's a simple matter. If we analyze from the point of view of internal political interest in Algeria, Bouteflika has been in power for 20 years and has been the man that has gathered Algerian forces after the long period, the 90s, when terrorism tried somehow to finish with the Algerian regime. Bouteflika is a man who is broadly recognized internationally, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs in the first term of Boumediene, and all internal struggles separated him from power, and then he came back many years later, and he was the person who first offered security for the state. It stabilized it, and in an important moment when the price of oil is very high, he developed the country's economy. He stabilized, especially after a terrible period of time when terrorism was about to end with state institutions. And he was the only person able to continue providing stability. But what happened? Abdelaziz Bouteflika, more than he running Bouteflika, I have the feeling that he is being presented, because whenever he presents, he wins. What is happening? He is already 82 years old. He is quite sick. He doesn't have much political life now. These are orders, but the physical presence of Bouteflika can't be seen on the streets, and the people protest. If we look at at this in a logical way, we say yes, of course. I think that the Algerian regime presents Bouteflika to win the elections, and then what happened after winning elections, I have doubts. In any case, what we are looking at present is that the pressure on the streets, demonstrations have made Bouteflika, or on his behalf, they have made public a document where he says that he is running for fifth term, but he commits to, after winning the elections, he will appoint a new government and call new elections. If we look at it without analyzing deeper, it is clear that the Algerian regime wants to win the elections to continue with its politics. Of course, he has committed to some things, to a new constitution for the country, to give more voice to youth, etc. But of course, we are going to analyze it in another way. Algeria's capacity, if we look at from the energy point of view, as you were saying, you were talking about the gas that would cross Algeria towards Europe. But the great monster of the north of Africa, energy-wise, is Algeria. And Algeria, all its life, has had one enemy, which is called France. We have the experience of what France did in Libya. Perhaps Libya was the most developed country of Africa, is inexistent today, not because Libyans are stupid. It doesn't exist because Western powers destroyed it. Algerian people have that experience, and they don't want Western countries to do the same thing with Algeria as they did in Libya. And here, I believe that they are in a reasonable position of defense of the Algerian interests. Because the matter is a struggle north-south. You have it clear. You are looking now with everything, what is happening in Venezuela. We can explain the same idea. European countries want to control Algeria and control all the energy system. Europe, Spain, France, Italy feeds from Algerian energy. And the Algerians know very well, they've always known, that France, as a former colonial power, still has not forgiven the fact that Algeria sent them away. Do you discard, as our former guest, you don't discard that foreign actors like France could instrumentalize these protests we are looking at in Algeria in other cities, as they did before in other countries? Of course, absolutely. France's strategy in this aspect, I also believe it. Now, we must consider that Algeria is a very important country. In these last years, Algeria has prepared for the situation. Algeria has very good military relations with Russia. It has highly prepared army with state-of-the-art weapons. And we also must consider the situation in Algeria. There's a natural enemy in Algeria that is called Morocco. We must understand that Mali, even if they don't say it, Mali has a current war. What happens is that the press doesn't publish it. Sometimes they say terrorists in Mali. No, French army in Mali, NATO's army in Mali are struggling against these foreign armies that appear and disappear. Therefore, on the other hand, it has Libya, that nobody knows what is happening in Libya. So I think that, as you said, there are many possibilities that they instrumentalize street demonstrations to intervene somehow. It is not so easy, but I do believe that Algeria is prepared for that case, because we can also talk about the case of the famous Arab Springs. What they have done with the Arab countries. We have the proof in Libya. I think the only important country that they would have liked to have in their hand is Algeria, and they were unable. Perhaps this is a new strategy. We will see in these days, because according to the news I have and the analysis I made, is that the Algerian system will try somehow to end street protests, because when you have street protests, it's easier for European countries. And when I talk about European countries, I'm thinking of France, interfere in the political life in Algeria. And let's not forget that the natural enemy of Algeria, Morocco, that could also be used to unstabilize the country. And in the midst of this panorama, what is more convenient for Europe, talking as a whole in energy terms regarding Algeria? It's unbelievable what the European Commission wants to do. These northern countries believe that the world is theirs. For them, Algeria is a country that located in Africa with unbelievable energy power, oil and gas, and they need that oil and gas, and they're capable of destroying Algeria and stay with gas and oil. This is what we saw in Syria. We have many proof of what we saw in Libya. That's a great problem. My peer from Sahrawi, the Sahrawi journalist, said that Morocco has occupied 80% of Western Sahara. The European court said that Europe cannot make agreements with Morocco where because Morocco is a different country from Western Sahrawi. They found the way, they signed the agreement, and ships are fishing from Sahrawi waters, pillaging there, etc. Europe thinks that since we have the world strategy, Africa is Europe. Europe will not get into Latin America. Mr. Trump and his friends is there. But Europe, with France at the head, believes that their backyard is Africa. And Algeria is in Africa, a few kilometers away from Europe. It's a very rich country and will try by all means to stay with natural resources, in this case gas and oil, because a time will come that all the independence of the southern countries Spain, France, and Italy will depend on Algerian energy. Indoors, based on what you described, this people is marked by violence, 8 years to become independent from France. That was finally obtained in 1962. The entire last decade in a civil war. But the current president had a lot to do with his national conciliation plan. I ask you if you believe that indoors these foreign interests will find resistance. Can you repeat the question, please? Do you believe that foreign interests around there will find in Algeria indoors national patriotic feelings? Completely. Demonstrations against Bouteflika has nothing to do with a foreign presence or the support of foreign intervention. The historic reminder of what France did during the occupation, and especially the 8 years of liberation war, is not forgotten by the Algerian people. Therefore, I think that if there is an external intervention, the Algerian people will gather and unite against that action. I am completely sure. And it's not casual that President Abdelaziz Bouteflika be called a sick man, without talking about his achievements that you helped us describe, who has provided the country and guaranteed economic stability and national conciliation in the first years, and to be the only country that overcame this so-called Arab Spring in 2011. Yes, we have to see that everything done by the Algerian Revolution, it's their independence since 1962. If we look at those who are on the streets, it's very strange to see people of 60, 70, 80 years old. They are all youngsters born after the revolution. And it is people who are in the social networks, and that many Algerian youngsters, it's true, I'm not completely defending the Algerian system, because when youngsters go to the streets, there's some problem. There's no doubt about that. But the youngsters who are going out to the streets, these are receiving messages from the social networks. They want a job, they want to live better, and of course it's logic that the regime must pay attention to this. This is why I believe that yesterday Bouteflika said that he will run for elections to win them, but after winning elections, he will propose new elections, a new constitution, assistance, aid for the youngsters, a new development model, etc. If he does it or not, that's another matter. But years go by, and Algeria is a very rich country with a huge economic potential that must be exploited to develop the country, of course. Thank you very much, Bachir Alnet. Thank you. We have there a description of several factors that allow us to conclude that we must see the events that take place in these days in this strategic country of Maghreb, north of Africa, very close to Europe, with an unbelievable energy power, gas, crude, and mineral resources. Protests started on February 22, and certainly could be functional to foreign occupation, recolonization interests, in the case of France, to take over these resources, even if it is also true there is a high level of unemployment that is affecting youth. Nevertheless, it could not be as easy to for these foreign interests, because this country has been marked by colonization and civil war. Youth and social networks are the main tools. At this time, this is an important country with strategic relations abroad with Russia and an important military presence of weapons. We will follow the events in these days and look the small letters. We end our critical move today. Thank you for being